Hey, Shift Shapers. Welcome to another solo episode of Shaping the Shift. I love these moments because they give me and you a chance to sit and collect our thoughts, reflect, be with the content that we've been blessed with and explored together and excavated together over the last month or 4 to 5 weeks. I think it's important that we don't just rush through this process, right? That we sit in it a bit. And that's why we've expanded seasons to 18 episodes to give us that opportunity. I also decided to record outside today. So you may hear wind chimes, you may hear wind, you may hear the birds. I may do this more. I really enjoy being outside. Even the unexpected and inconvenient sounds that may come with. So we're just going to be with all of it today in our conversation. Thank you so much. Let me just say in advance for supporting this podcast, the people who come to this podcast. There's so many forms of giving and receiving with just this podcast. There's the guest giving of themselves, the listeners receiving, also giving feedback. There's the gifts that we give the guests for coming on the show as a thank you, and then just receiving deeper relationship with both the audience and with the folks that come onto the show to share wisdom. It's this beautiful symbiotic relationship, and when I think about it, it seems like it was just always naturally there, and maybe part of that was intention setting, but it also speaks to the fact that when we started this podcast on May 1st of 2020, all of us were looking for something to trust in, something to believe in, something secure and consistent. And little did we know that this podcast would provide us with all of those things in ways that we hadn't imagined or envisioned for ourselves. I never really know for sure what the topic of these solo episodes is going to be until like literally 48 hours before. Nikki Black of Little Cali Creative Co., who does our social media for Shaping the Shift, will ask me, do you know what the title will be? And I'm like, can you please bear with me, give me a moment? And she's always so gracious to do that because I think even she recognizes that I don't always know. Part of that is because I've learned that when you set the intention to create a space that is governed by spirit, that is shaped and shifted by the higher good, and you've called that in, you've intentionally, daily, in all sorts of ways, practice integrating that into what you're creating. Even on the days when you don't do it so well, it counts that you show up. When you do that, there's a level and a point at which you just have to trust. And I've been sitting with that word so much since my initiation this year. I think I have thought of myself as a very trusting person. Over time, I don't think of myself as someone who walks around inherently distrustful, but this first quarter of 2021 has shown me that that is not true. I'm an obedient person when it comes to spirit, when it comes to my ancestors. I'm obedient to what I'm being asked to do, what I'm being told to do, the messages I'm told to convey. But obedience is not the same as trust, though trusting something can make it easier to be obedient. Obedient is, compliance, and there's many reasons we can choose to be obedient, mainly to avoid consequences, right? And even if I think about the episode with Maida on decolonizing spirituality and the ongoing conversations we've had around that, so much of our spiritual practice is around avoiding a thing, avoiding the things that we deem to be unpleasant, the emotions that we have judged or categorized as bad. And so in those cases, obedience does not directly mean trust has to be there. In fact, fear is often a driving force for obedience. Being afraid of making a mistake, being afraid of what people are going to say or do or think. It can make us comply and conform in ways that we are not always conscious or aware of, but also are not enjoying. And I realized that there's parts of the initiation that show you that distinction, that 3-day process. There are moments when you're like, oh no, this is not about obedience. This is about, without knowing what the next step looks like, without having control, do you trust? I would have said a couple weeks ago, maybe even less, that, trust is about blind faith, maybe, or just knowing that the unknown should be explored, is within your right to explore, something along those lines. I don't think I've ever actually stopped long enough to define trust, but I don't know if I shared it here, but I do remember telling folks about the story of being in a hotel on my anniversary with my husband, tired, seeing that soft bed, comfortable bed, so excited to take a nap in it, going into a sleep in the arms of my husband in this safe, comfortable space, and feeling my legs twitching like they were running from something. And the thought that came to me was, see, even in this moment, in this space of what should look like pure security and safety, you don't trust. You're thinking there's something you haven't done, something you need to do. You're not sitting in the enoughness of the moment. You're preoccupied with what isn't. And that really, really is the reason I picked up the book, Radical Acceptance, which I've shared with you all via social media a couple of times. The work of Tara Brach and the sharing of Buddhist principles around how to sit with things, how to witness things. Um, the work of Dr. Crystal Jones, who has graced us with her presence on the podcast. Even in her bio, she says, I am a witness, and really thinking about the difference between witnessing and containing, making that shift, that distinction between the two spaces. I would have thought personally for myself, like, I know I have existed as a container. I'm a therapist. Before I was a therapist for the public, I was a therapist within my family. I'm a mother. Um, and you grow up, I'm the oldest child. You grow up expecting to be responsible for holding space, particularly emotional space, comfortable space for other people. I'm a Black woman, right? There's all these spaces in me that are used to being the holder of something. And I don't judge that. I think that's a beautiful thing to know how to do. I don't think it should be my assigned identity or anyone's to be the container. That there's never a space in which you should be held, the thing held within the container, that someone can be container for you. And because this experience is one-sided often for some of us who find ourselves in caregiver bodies or modes or roles, we never get to exercise true trust. We never have to. Though everybody's benefiting, right? Like, we don't have to make ourselves vulnerable to that, and other people get to be held. And so in walks codependence, right? Out walks interdependence. The truth is, to be held would require a degree of trust that I had not matured in. When Oya says, "You come to me for everyone else's problems, but not yours," what is that? I don't doubt the capacity of Oya to hold me. Why don't I rest easy in it? Why do my legs still kick or run even when I should be at rest? The work gained through radical acceptance and through the understanding that there is a difference between obedience and trust. There is a difference between container and witness. And one of the stark differences is, as a witness, I don't interfere. Why? Because I trust. I trust the process. I trust that whatever is happening, no matter whether it feels good or does not feel good, is ultimately for my good. Now, that is much easier said than done. So I've been sitting with how would I define trust and how wouldn't I define trust, right? So I don't believe trust is, how do I want to say this? Here's the definition that I'm working with. Trust is not a lack of awareness that there are things, energies, people, systems with the intention of causing harm. But trust is a heightened awareness of the fact that I cannot be harmed without my permission. And so when I'm stepping into that unknown, trust says it doesn't matter that it's unknown. Nothing in this unknown can harm me without my permission. That is a very different understanding than I've had leading up to the road to 40 years old. I'll give you a great example. It's part of the reason this topic is so raw right now for me. My daughter's been ill this week. Few things will humble you or bring you down to your core faith and belief system like a sick child, especially when you don't know why they're sick. For the first few days, we didn't know. And we had a couple visits to the doctor before we were able to get some clarity and some information. In the meanwhile, she was experiencing suffering, fever, pain, discomfort. And there were moments I felt so helpless to do anything about her suffering other than be with her in the suffering. And one particular day, we were at the doctor's office and she was so tired and so uncomfortable. I used some of the sheets in the doctor's office to try to create a place for her to rest, to sleep. And once I got her comfortable and we were waiting a long wait for the doctor to come in, I just meditated. And I made an agreement at that moment that so much of my life energy had been spent resisting things, not wanting to feel the things. What I typically would have done is prayed the sickness away, alchemized it, and turned it into a story. I would have done ritual day and night in a very physical form, right? Actually, like gathering things and creating ritual. And I thought this time, what would it be like to trust the sickness, to trust her young body, to trust that the sickness wasn't here with a harmful intention. And even if it was, it cannot hurt us without our permission, to trust that her body knew what it was doing and was going to see her through the process. I don't remember intentionally sitting and agreeing to trust something that I deemed harmful, something that literally was causing pain, literally was causing suffering. But but I had assumed it was with the harmful intention, and it was that assumption that was causing more harm. When I removed that assumption and said, I don't know why you're here. I'm going to trust that you're here to reveal something valuable and good to us. And even if you're not, you cannot harm us without our consent and permission, and we do not consent. We only consent to doing this work with you together for the highest good. And I was able later on the car ride home to turn to my daughter and ask her, what are 3 things that you're grateful for, even in the midst of your pain? And the fact that she was able to identify 3 things, one of them being all the people who showed up and showed care, even those who didn't know her at the doctor's office, was like, what a beautiful thing to learn in the midst of this. Something that I may not have learned without this sickness, something that she may not have learned without the sickness. I never thought of the challenging things as partners in my evolution. And maybe that's because I was so busy being obedient to the forces I thought would just push them away that I never considered that those same forces sent them there in the first place to teach me how to trust, to teach me how to remember that nothing can harm me without my consent. You might hear my dog breathing in the background. He's a part of this trust process too. And now what I feel is when I when there's tension in my body, I'm aware that it's me not trusting something that I have designated as bad or harmful or scary. And now I can use the tools of radical acceptance and use the tools that Tara Brach teaches us through the wisdom of Buddhism to sit at the table with those emotions, to sit at the table with those, with the sickness, with the fear about money, with the fear of not being enough, with the exhaustion or whatever it may be, and say, I trust you too. Exhaustion, you're here to remind me to treat myself as a precious object, as Julia Cameron says in The Artist's Way. Fear of money, you're here to teach me to be a good steward and to remember where my source comes from and never forget, right? Sickness, you're here to teach me to be kind to this body and to allow people to show up and care for me, even in my healthy moments. There's power in trust. There's power in obedience when it's there for the right reasons. The power in trust allows you to stand in full agency with all the forces of this entire cosmology, this entire multiverse, without designation, without demonizing some over others, and and say that all of these forces are here to evolve me, to move me forward for the highest good. That is what trust does. It is not being naive. And the harmful things that have happened in life that we've experienced were not just for harm's sake. And were not because we trusted. They didn't happen because of our trust. They happened because they happened, and there was data and information in that happening that deepened our connection to ourself, to spirit, and to others. And there is a way to take something that is viewed as harmful and trust that it could not have happened without some elevation. Now, maybe the people around us didn't know that. It's not exactly taught in schools. We've been taught that the hard things that happen, the traumatic things that happen to us, we own those stories, we keep those stories, we walk with those stories. But what then happens? And are there different layers to the story, different pieces? When something breaks, when something's traumatic, when it tears open, what else comes through besides the pain? What wisdom, what spiritual gift, what ability, what new relationship, what possibility comes through there as well? Because we are not trained to trust things that can hurt, to sit with them and witness as multiple things come through the cracks they leave behind, some that feel more pleasant than others, but all with the capacity to help us to evolve to deeper levels of healing. If we don't trust it, if we just comply, we miss the opportunity to liberate ourselves from pain, from old stories that were never intended to hold us hostage. They were intended to show us other parts of ourselves, of our beings, of this world that we can evolve. I always say, I don't know people who are evolved and who are unique in their leadership and their abilities who have not experienced trauma, who do not go through hard things. It is a part of what deepens our connection to life itself and to each other. And we have to trust that too. We have to trust that we can partner with it and evolve with it. That will take us some practice. I invite you to read Radical Acceptance, to apply it to your life, to practice it. I just also invite you to think about all the ways we colonize our emotions, colonize ourselves for feeling the emotions. And on this quest for true liberation, shouldn't we, at the very, very least, my friends, learn how to believe in and deeply trust ourselves?